sky. FPK, Future Proof Knowledge Podcast.
Future Proof Knowledge Podcast, episode 16. We are here. We're going to be hitting 20 very soon, folks. This week I am joined by, I suppose I can say, my partners in crime right now, Miss Olive Hickmott and Jashon Mills. How are you both doing today?
Good, thank you.
Excellent.
Great stuff. And today on the podcast, we are going to be talking about everything that's good with the education system. I know, shock horror. We're actually going to be saying things that are quite positive about the education systems that we experience today. And hopefully the educators out there won't feel like we're bashing them all the time, because we're not. We're just trying to look at ways that we can support and help and develop a more inclusive way of and collaborative way of working together. But I suppose to kick things off, Olive, I'll come to you first, because you actually gave me a lovely line that you heard today in terms of how we can be with the schools, but also how the schools can be with the students and how the students can be with the people around them. So what is it?
What was I saying? We need to be an ally, not an enemy of the school system, because the school system doesn't have much opportunity to change, and it's very controlled by governments here and the national curriculum. And so we have the great advantage of being able to look at other possibilities when we aren't teaching 30 kids. And so it's not surprising the teachers don't get this opportunity, and we have to work out how we can encourage them to, I suppose, take on board, but listen to what's going on out there in the outside world that could help their kids. Because at the bottom line is, all teachers really want to help the kids, but they are controlled by how they can do it.
Absolutely. And I think that the reason I wanted you to bring that in straight away, because it actually is really important. And like, for years I've worked with families who've battled with schools and battled with teachers and battled with their children to get them into school. And I think sometimes that fundamental reality gets lost, in that everybody wants the same thing.
Yeah.
Everybody wants the child to feel comfortable, to be in an environment that they feel safe and that they can learn. And that's what everybody wants. And I think sometimes in society, we forget that across the board, because when we jump to judgments and decisions around, this is what I think this person means by what they say, we don't actually know. And what we need to try and do is just be an ally. And like, governments do a great job of driving wedges between teachers and parents, between boards of management and principals, between you, I, and Jashon. Like, they do a phenomenal job of driving a wedge, because it keeps us fighting among ourselves so that they can carry on doing what they want to do at a higher level, getting money. Not that I'm cynical or anything about governments, but I do think when we take that step back and recognize that pretty much everybody is in for the same reasons, then we can start to reframe our approach with schools and how to support them to support the students, because ultimately that's what we all want. Jashon, I want to come to you, because when I posed this question to you earlier on for the podcast, you were like, oh man, that's going to be a tough one to answer, because the system here isn't great. But I want you to kind of elaborate on that, because today's focus is on the things that are working well, or the things that do work well in the education system. What do you think, what are some of the challenges you see? But if you start to dig into that, where do you see shoots of enthusiasm, or there's a better word I'm looking for and I can't think what it is, but a potential improvement going forward?
Here in the US, I would say the biggest problem that we face with education depends on what administration is in office. Currently, our education administration is horrible. But the positive sides of our education is, with my experience and the educators that I know, especially the ones that are involved with my son, educators here are very motivated, very excited, very enthusiastic. They spend a lot of time doing going to conferences and learning more stuff and trying to learn the new cutting edge ways of delivering education, and they're motivated. But the problem with that is, and I'm going to get sidetracked here and I can't help myself for it. Um, I've always felt this way. I don't understand, and in the US, it's a big problem. Teachers don't get paid squat. So, what's hampering the enthusiasm of educators is, I believe, a financial thing as well, because they want to do the best they can. They want to give the resources, they want to go to conferences and learn more, but everything comes out of their pocket. I know teachers that buy supplies for their classroom out of their pocket because waiting for things to come in through approvals and this and that and funding fights with school boards, it's easier for them to do it. And the gripe that's taken me off track is, I don't understand how in any part of the world a teacher's a teacher is almost the least paid profession out there. I know people that work at McDonald's fast food chain that make as much as teachers. A doctor can make up to millions of dollars a year. A doctor would not be a doctor if not for a teacher. So the hierarchy of who's getting paid what, we want good educators, we need to pay them like we pay doctors, and stop paying doctors or athletes like we pay athletes. I think just the whole financial thing is the corruption of education. But the positive is we have good educators. We just need to find a way to push the system to support them, not just with knowledge, but with the financial support that schools need and educators need.
Yeah, and like I've started watching the comedy show. What's it called? Abbott Elementary. Have you seen that? Okay. I've started watching it. I think it's probably one of the streaming services has it, and it's based out of Philadelphia, and it's set in a school, and it follows this. It's the lady who wrote it is the main person in it, but she's this very young, enthusiastic teacher coming into this school, and she's got all these big ideas, and this is going to be great, and this is going to be great, and then by season 3, she's like, no, I'm just going to come in and teach because the system has just broken me. And all the older teachers are there and they're like, don't get, all worked up about trying to make a difference, and just look after your class and that'll be the best that you can do. And don't try and change the policy and this, that, and the other. But it's actually a really, really interesting snapshot of my experience in Ireland of working with schools, where it's very similar, where teachers aren't, it's, I won't say it's a well-paid job here. It's definitely not, but it's, you can get a good salary. But like that, there's a lot of teachers who will go and buy classroom elements out of their own pocket because they just know they're not going to get any money or any income from, or any support from above. And like, it doesn't mean they don't go ask. They do go ask, and they have the conversation with the principal. The principal probably gives them the same stock answer, going, let me just dig around my back pocket and see what I can find, because that's the best we're going to get. So it's just interesting that even in a parody show like Abbott Elementary, it's hitting on a lot of the things that can be really, really challenging for teachers, and yet they stay in it. And I think that comes back to the driver and the heart, that even for those teachers who are maybe long-term and maybe not broken by the system, but they're used to working in that system, they still keep doing it. They still keep trying to educate. They still see that their purpose is to try and be an educator. It's changed a lot over the last 20, 30 years for teachers, from speaking to them, where maybe 20 years ago it was you went in and you taught the curriculum, excuse me. Now teachers have to be aware of neurodiversity. They have to be aware of individual education plans. They have to be aware of children's backgrounds and their mental health. So they're almost becoming counsellors and psychotherapists who aren't trained as counsellors and psychotherapists, but they're feeling that pressure because they're standing beside children who may be in floods of tears going, I can't cope with life. And like, there's so much stress on those teachers, and yet they still do it, which I think is one of the fundamental positives that is in the education system today. And we still get people going into that career. Now, definitely in Ireland, it's getting less and less, or they're emigrating to Australia, to the UK, but there's still people with that desire, and that is one of the biggest things. It's that human element. Olive, I want to come to you, because like, when we look at, you do a lot of work with teachers, you do a lot of work with schools, you do a lot of work with students and families, like, and I'll jump in with my own experience of this, but I want to get your take on what you see are some of the things that are working in the UK education system, or in the classroom specifically.
A lot of people are home educating, which is a very high indicator of what is actually going on. A lot of I think one of the challenges, and this is going to sound a bit negative in comparison to you, one of the challenges is they are so controlled by the national curriculum, and by Ofsted measuring them against the national curriculum, it's very difficult for them to do anything else. And I have instances of, I'll put a broader thing on it first of all. I'm a coach, and I was talking to a coach today, and they have a group of coaches in their locality, and once a month they go into school and offer them a training session for free, because there's no spare money. They're offering them a training session on one topic or another, which definitely affects them. So if we could be organising that nationwide, if we got some initiative going on there. And a number of the coaches are so committed to children's education and offering them the best tools they can for whatever they're dealing with, whether it's literacy, stress, anxiety, whatever it is, then I think actually that could catch on for in different locations. But going back to what they're good at, I mean, they are totally committed, of that I agree, but they are also, I mean, even the new teachers that you see come off the production line of teacher training, they are even more committed to doing what they're told to do. They don't really have the space to spread their wings anymore. I mean, in the UK we have, there was an announcement yesterday that every child is going to be tested for their reading ability at the age of 13. And I just looked at that and went, excuse me, do we not know what the child's reading ability is at the age of 13? We've had them in school for years, and we should know what their reading and their spelling ability is. And there's not a lot of point in actually testing them to prove the label. What I'd rather see in schools is, let's go and use some of the modern neuroscience that we understand now for how children learn to read and spell, and teach them that. Because whilst you're doing an hour's testing, you could be actually doing an hour's teaching, and teaching them how to use the skills that they've already got.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did see that when you shared it, and it kind of, I found it interesting. More testing, that's what we need, more and more testing. But okay, I'm going to jump in and be really, really positive here, right? Because you two are bloody negative. I'm joking. Right, what I've seen working well over the last, I would say, 10 to 12 years in schools is an understanding in a number of schools of the additional needs and the importance of recognizing those additional needs so that students can access that support. Now, I'm making very generalized statements. Some schools will not be as good as others, but in general, there is definitely more recognition. There's more of a move towards nurture rooms. There's more of a move towards, I was going to say, getting more special education teachers in the classroom, but in the last year or so, the Irish government have been reducing the amount of special education teachers. But like there is that recognition that, okay, these students do have challenges when it comes to the traditional setting. So let's look at trying to make some adaptations as best as we can. And definitely I've seen more openness from teachers to begin to explore different opportunities within the constraints that they have. So like any teacher I speak to about the Empowering Learning Program and I show it to them, they are blown away by it, going, absolutely, we need this in our school. Absolutely, we need to have this as another string to our bow as we are going through our learning journey to become a teacher. And they see the actual benefit for the child sitting in front of them. They also see the benefit of getting children into the optimal learning state, which we have in the FPK University platform. But teachers are using those as well. There are teachers who are, getting their children grounded, children who maybe need to move. They're getting movement breaks more often than they used to. And the teachers and the special education teachers are trying their best to create an environment that is inclusive and supportive within the constraints that they have to operate within. And I think that is a great step forward. And what it does is it provides a platform for the likes of Future Proof Knowledge to come into a school and give them a simple add-on. Because I think, like we all know, and I know very few people who will turn around and go, teachers are lazy feckers. They just put their feet up at the front of the class, and again, I'm being general here, and do nothing. Like teachers do a lot of work. They have to deal with a lot. They have to control a lot. They have to try and teach a lot. So what we need to do as these allies, as you so eloquently put it, Olaf, is to try and give them the techniques and support structures that doesn't add to their plate, but in actual fact, over a longer term, take stress off them and off their students, which will allow everybody to be able to teach better and learn better, because they're doing the best they can within the constraints that they have, but it doesn't always work that way. Say again, Olive?
Can I say this again?
I don't know. I'm going to let you say it. I might argue back.
Alan is in Ireland, right? I'm in the UK. they have changed the curriculum in Ireland over the last couple of years. And what's more, they've changed the curriculum with a lot of input from the teachers. It isn't God's come down from the top and said, this is what you must do. They've taken a lot of advice from the teachers. And there's more flexibility in Ireland than there is here. And I know this is true because we have one of our practitioners in Ireland has been teaching at Teacher Training College for the last 2 years, all of this sort of stuff, to undergraduate teachers. And he's taught 2 cohorts so far, with 25, I think, in each cohort. So those are going out into the schools, and they'll have got some understanding of how we teach through the FBK University and Empowering Learning. We haven't got that far in the UK, and it is in a much more controlled environment. Indeed, one of the things we specialise in, if you like, is teaching children who think in pictures, and there is a huge percentage of children from the age of 4 upwards who think in pictures. People say to me from time to time, oh, that's all been debunked. Well, actually, you talk to a 4-year-old and they've got amazing pictures. You don't need a piece of research, yet another piece of research to prove that. And so we're focusing on enabling our teachers to have the skills to teach visual children, or children who think in pictures. Because years ago, when the national curriculum was invented around the time of post-war, we didn't have children who were so visual. I mean, I always say to people, is it any surprise our children are really visual these days? I can remember the black and white TV arriving in our house, then we had the colour TV, then we had the internet, and then we had iPhones. It's changed so much in my lifetime that it isn't surprising that the teaching system hasn't caught up with the immense skills of young visual thinkers. I'll stop there.
No, you're hitting the nail on the head, and there's so many people out there who, again, we're learning, like the 21st century and the 20th century have been like nothing in the history of the world in terms of the development and understanding of human beings and human interaction, but also technology. Like this will go down as just probably the start of something, of a revolutionary change. And that's really, really good. But it's funny, I was only thinking last night, I was reading a book on what life was like back in the 1700s. And I just started thinking, like, we look back at that time in the 1700s, which is only a couple of 100 years ago, and go, wow, like, we've come so far. Like, what are they going to look back at us in 1,000 years' time and go, oh my God, like, can you believe they did it that way back then? Like, did nobody know? Like, oh my God. And here we are with chips in our brains and everything, and, not dying ever. Like, it's just living on Mars, whatever. Like, it just got me thinking, which is totally kind of sidetracking the conversation. Jashon, like, I know I've challenged you to kind of talk about what's going well in the US, but like, talk to me about the positive experiences that you as parents and your son have experienced versus what it probably would have been like for your son 30 years ago or 40 years ago when you and I would have been at the same stage. Oh, hold on a sec.
I don't think my son would have even been required to go to school 40 years ago, with his diagnosis he has now. But with the current education, some of the wins and some of the good things I can say, I'll be honest, from my personal point of view and with my son, I haven't had any positive um, experiences in public education. None. Every positive experience that I've received from public education was because of my wife and I fighting for it and demanding that things get done. That's my personal experience. What I do see in general, and again, my experience isn't everybody's, um, the things we have fought for that we have gotten once they're implemented. Um, Again, it just goes back to the educators. I've been surrounded by a lot of good educators for my son who want to do everything that they can do. It's just the system is what makes me say I've never had a good public school education. The best education for my son that we ever got was through private education, him receiving education and ABA therapy as a mixed combination. So a combination of therapeutic and education combined, which isn't typically done well, if at all, within a public education system. Um, what is great is the advancement in material for my son. So 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they didn't have the type of learning materials, technology, and tools that we have today. My son is very into technology. He's very technology focused. So for him to be able to pick up a device and to be able to learn that way is awesome. Not just giving him a device, but giving him platforms to learn on, like FPK University or Learnetics, another one that does some good lessons for autism. Being able to use interactive courses and things like that that weren't available to people even 10 years ago is amazing. And it's not just neurodiverse. And I guess I'm not going to even use neurodiverse when we have these conversations anymore. I'm just going to say any neurotypical kid, because every kid is typical. They typically are all stupid and all do silly things. So um, every kid can benefit from this new technology and the way we learn and absorb information. I mean, even if you take uh, current textbook versus our textbook 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the delivery method and the way the lesson is described, just the descriptions and just the way it's laid out is formatted differently. It's formatted for a wider range of audience to be able to easily understand it. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of good things, and I think it all is tied to technology. And I think with AI, it's going to just accelerate and get better as the years go by. But back to thinking about what it was like even 100 years ago in education. I mean, I used to watch Little House on the Prairie, and they went to the little school, and everybody went and sat into that class. But I think about the educators that were in Little House on the Prairie. You take it back to when they were kids. So you got the kids in the little schoolhouse on the top of the hill, Laura Ingalls. The teacher that was teaching Laura Ingalls, when that teacher was a child, they didn't necessarily have the traditional schools. You might have learned a class in a church on a Sunday afternoon, but society went on. There were still bankers who knew math. There were still people who ran businesses. There was still government going on. So the world was able to still develop, and people still did things and did research even without a traditional education system. So it surprises me that with all the structure and stuff that we have now, why are we not more advanced than where we are? Because we're not too much more advanced than Little House on the Prairie. We just have bigger schools.
It's an interesting point. We're not more advanced than we were 100 years ago. And like, I suppose if we look at, it can be the purpose of it. So say during 100 years ago, let's go back 100 years ago in Ireland, or slightly more, where teaching Irish in schools was just not allowed. The British government would shut it down. We put it, say it nicely. They'd shut it down. But we got what they call bush schools or hedge schools. Oh, that's terrible now, I forget. But basically, like schools would take place where the kids would be taught Irish, to speak Irish, the Irish language and stuff like that, and Irish history in hedges and bushes. But there was a desire then to keep this going, otherwise it would die out. Whereas maybe that's different now. Like, so the purpose is different now. And I think you're right. I think where we've moved to is, how do we get as many people as possible educated in the most structured way? Because, like, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, they learned by working with an artist. So that's like one-to-one teaching. They weren't sitting in a big classroom. And I think this is where I think AI has the opportunity to support educators for it to become that one-to-one teacher for the student, because we just don't have the ability to teach people one-to-one unless, like Olive said at the very start, parents take on to homeschool. But that's a huge commitment from any parent, and it's going to present a lot of challenges. Olive, I want to come to you on homeschooling. So, like, what's been your experience, or of any, if any, of students being homeschooled versus students who are taught through the typical system?
I think the homeschooling initiative is absolutely brilliant. I've seen some brilliant children coming out the end of it. I'm not a total expert in it, but there is loads and loads of incredibly useful. I mean, they don't necessarily, homeschooling sounds as if they sit at home all day long. They don't. They go to various things, and they go to the things they're interested in. One of the things I was going to say to you was that I think the student voice, if we could hear the student voice better than we're hearing it now, is what works for them, what they're interested in. I mean, I have a big thing, as you know, about the creativity, curiosity, problem-solving skills that they're born with, and I have a list of 40 of these. But they've all got these in abundance, and when they go through the national curriculum, it is what someone else thinks they should be learning all the time. It's not necessarily what they want to be learning. And my thing is that people should be able to learn what they want to learn in some environment or another. I mean, I was very lucky when I went to school, and this is totally hundreds of years ago, that I was never good at literacy, but I was good at maths, so they decided I should do maths, and I took maths GCSE a year early, and A-levels another year early, and went off to university to do a maths degree because my literacy was rubbish at the time. That was before I learnt, when I was 50, how to spell and read properly and not go to sleep at the same time. And so I was allowed to do what I was good at, not in a very formal way, but in a very informal way. I did loads of sport and loads of maths, and the rest of it, goodness knows what happened to. I mean, I did pass enough to get through to university, but not great. And I think that's the thing that homeschooling actually gives you, is enabling children to do what they, you could say, I mean, either what they want to do or do what they're here on the planet to do. You know, they have a motivation to do something that they develop. You know, everybody develops as they go through life, which may change, their pathways may change, but you know, you can often see in a really young child the amazing skills they've got. I mean, Jashon was talking about his lad with IT. You know, you can see those skills and you can go, when he's 40 years old, I wonder what he'd be doing. And something related to those sort of things. And I think that's the great advantage of homeschooling. But I think also, I've heard quite a lot about other schools rather than the standard system that can actually facilitate that. You don't have to be homeschooled to do that. But I do think it's the children, it's the student voice, and for them to be given the, not the power, that's the wrong word, given the opportunity to speak up for themselves. And there are schools like that, where the schools, I mean, I can't remember the names of them, but there are schools like that where the kids really run the school to a large extent, and they run the behavioural issues that go on in school, and they have consortium that meet up every week or every day or whatever it is to have some words to, they are saying what needs to happen. And I feel that's where it's going to move to, because I think the days of a national curriculum, everybody learning the same thing all the time, is actually a complete waste of our skills of our youngsters. I remember somebody told me that, I don't know if this is true, but I take their word for it, they knew about phonics training, and they said, you can go into a school in your village at 9 o'clock in the morning and listen to a phonics lesson, and you can go to one in the neighbouring village at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and hear the same lesson. It is that controlled. That level of control doesn't give the teachers any autonomy, and it doesn't give them any opportunity to teach in the best way for their children.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that I think is, so people in positions of authority will say, okay, well, let's get the child's voice, which is great. But what they do is then they get the child's voice and go, that's the child's voice, so this is the way we're doing it, which leaves no space for the child to change their mind. And the reality is, we all grow, our interests change, our interests develop, and that only comes through exposure to different things. So like, there's been many things that I didn't know about that I took an interest in and found out about. I went and I found out the information for myself. So there has to be that space for things to be able to change. And I think, again, this is why, or how AI could be really beneficial, is that Alan wants to learn about history today through football, but tomorrow he wants to learn about geography through, putting on a VR headset and flying a plane around the world. And that should, not that it should, but I think that opportunity is presenting itself very soon.
Yeah.
Jashon,
No, Alan,
go on.
I would say one of the best advancements in education that I've seen and I got to experience was the move from when I was in high school, it was figure out what college you're going to, whether it's community college, a university, you got to go to college. I ended up dropping out of high school, so I never got pushed that. But what I did fall into, and it's a lot more prevalent now than it was 15, 20 years ago, is trade schools. And I'm a big supporter of trade schools. High school and basic education, you need. High school is your time to get your general understanding of multiple subjects. Um, Not all the schools give enough well-rounded time spent to exploring different career paths, but the ones that do, kudos to them. The ones that don't, they do touch on it a little bit. Being able to dabble and see what the different career paths are, and then be able to go to a trade school and learn specifically that trade, hands on, what you're going to be doing, and not be getting bogged down by required classes that have nothing to do with what your focus is absolutely phenomenal, mind blowing, game changing. And ever since I first learned about that type of training, I ended up going to ITT Technical Institute because I wanted to learn about electronics. I went. Um, I found out it wasn't something I wanted to do as a long-term career, but as a hobbyist. And I completed my first year. I got the knowledge I needed, but I didn't waste 3 or 4 years gaining all this knowledge and spending money on stuff that I didn't need. It was focused on what I needed, and I can go from trade school to trade school to trade school and learn specifically what I like without all the extra rubbish. So I think that's the greatest advancement, and I think that's what technology is giving us today, is even more fine-tuned into a trade school through AI. You can really fine tune what your interests are and learn that and be an expert at that without filling your jar with useless marbles that are wasting space.
Yeah, and I was at a conference last Thursday about immersive technology run by the fantastic people in Air Immersive, who will definitely get one or some of them on anyway to the podcast at some stage. But there was a presentation by a phenomenal lady called Mary Walsh O'Shea. I might actually see if we can get Mary on here as well. But they run nurse training, and they've brought in an examination element that uses VR. So the students put on a VR headset, they go in and they take the go through the vitals of the um, patient, and they get examined on that, and they give the patient a bed bath. And one of the findings they found was two of the people decided they didn't want to carry on with nursing because they couldn't picture themselves actually giving a real bed bath after experiencing the immersive experience of giving a bed bath. And someone beside me said, "Oh, that's awful." And I was like, "No, that's absolutely wonderful." One, this person is not going down a career path that ultimately they'll go and get a job and go, "Oh my God, I've qualified in this and I hate it because I just can't do that." But it's also saving money, saving time, and it's if we bring that further and bring, like, say, that immersive experience into schools, which when we had, oh my God, the lady's name escapes me now, I forget, talking about the VR in guidance counselling. Like, you might have students try it out and go, "No, that's not for me." But maybe as they get older, they might go, "Actually, no, I will." And they can go back to it. But they're not, like you said, Jashon, wasting time, wasting resources. And that can help them move in a different direction, which is absolutely fantastic. And definitely in Ireland, there's more of a push on for apprenticeships, which we have here, which is the same as the trade schools over there. Schools are starting to sit down and actually, we're getting proper schools for that, where students can go and gain a trade. The disconnect for me though is they still have to go through the examination process and able to go and do it. Whereas if they were started on that process at maybe excuse me, 13, 14 as opposed to 18. There may not be the challenging behaviors in school. There may not be the same dropout rates. There may not be the same drug issues. There may not be the same crime issues because people are on a career path that they know that they can do and that they can actually gain employment in. So it has very, very far-reaching potential. And I think because the costs are coming down all the time, hopefully that should make it a bit more accessible for schools so they're not have to divert other important financial commitments into this. So like there is that huge potential, which I think is something that is fantastic. And I also, if I'm going to bring you in on this, like I also look at those teachers who do take students out to do field trips and experience nature and experience history and experience geography, in the real world. Like they will do that, or they'll bring stuff in and they'll start to explore things. Like that's all really, really positive. And like I had some wonderful teachers who would do that kind of stuff that made education fun. And yes, they are they're more probably restricted now, but the opportunities are still there if the teachers are willing to, put the effort in to plan out that session. But they're planning the session anyway. Like if you were right, we're going to plonk you, Olive, into a classroom, right, and you can teach whatever subject to the students. But what would be the process you would go through that would be different to maybe some of the experience that they've had in education to date? Right, we've plonked you in to virtual classroom. Off you go, Olive. Teach us.
Because of my bent, I would probably talk to them about what pictures they hold in their head.
Okay.
And I would talk to them about, are they pictures that they've seen before, or are they imaginary pictures? And I'd probably get them to pair up to discuss, so that they actually learnt that the pictures they have in their head aren't the same as the pictures other people have got in their head. And they could explore them, explore whether they, all the qualities of their pictures, etc. And then they could talk the same thing through on their imagination. And at the moment, we don't do this at all in school. So you get a child at 14 is going, how do you know to ask these questions? Whereas if you actually start them off at 6 or 8, even younger, that they get used to talking about the pictures they have in their head, they're all much more comfortable about it. And then they can explain, for example, when they get into overload, they can explain to somebody what the devil's going on. Because at the moment they have no language at all. They just go, let me do a demo. There's too much going on. I can't stand this, and run away. And so because they haven't got the language to explain that. And I always remember one lad who I was sitting next to in a lecture theatre once and waiting for something to start, and I was talking to him about mental images, and he goes, how do you know to ask these questions? Nobody's ever asked me these questions before. And so I chatted to him about that. But it's like, that's what I do, and I get them to explore their own experience and what that might lead them into for as a career or as just for the next 10 minutes, and whether that's whether they can draw what they've got in their head, but they don't have to be good drawers. They can be really rubbish drawers. They can do sort of cartoony type stuff, so it doesn't matter if the crocodile's got 1,500 feet or not. It's like that's your imagination. And your imagination is okay. And I think getting them to a place where their imagination is okay is a really important thing. Einstein had a wonderful imagination. He didn't build half the stuff he imagined, I'm sure, probably even more than that. But he was able to construct what he, in some way or another. And that's a real gift, and you're gonna lose that gift to a large extent if you carry on doing exactly what the government's taught you to do, and you're not given space for your own creativity and imagination and stuff like that. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. And I remember working with a small group, I think there was maybe 4 or 5 in the group, of 10, 11-year-olds. And we were talking about the pictures in their head. And they started to describe individually the pictures in their head. So I basically took out my phone, went onto an AI, let them speak in what was in their head, and got the AI to create an image of the image that they had in their head, and just to compare what it created versus what the picture was like in their head. And it was fascinating. It got it right a lot of the time. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe you. One of them was, the one that sticks in my head was a whale surfing an ocean of cats. All right. And it created a whale on a surfboard with this big wave of cats. And he was like, oh my God, that's exactly what was in my head. Now, one of the other lads was like, no, that, whatever it was this, that's not what I was thinking. I was like, okay, back onto the voice and say in what it is that you need change, and boom. And what it was lovely about it was the fun element, that the picture in their head was something that, well, like all of you said, they may not be good at drawing, they may not be able to draw, and they may not feel confident enough just to do it anyway and feel really, have it be not good, or as good as they would like it to be, or to look like what's in their head. And here they could use the AI, and they were going to take the stuff home then to talk to their parents about it, which is...
But you may have some other kids in the class who would really like the opportunity to sketch that.
Absolutely.
And they might not be perfect drawers, but they might... I mean, I always remember I met a man who was an architect in somewhere like Shrewsbury or somewhere in the UK. And he designed, places where multiple shops are, big areas. And he taught architecture. And I said to him, how good are you? I started talking to him about how good are your pictures in your head. And he went, oh, there's an interesting topic. He said, I teach architecture. And I can guarantee to you that unless one of my students, or all of my students, can sketch what they want in 5 minutes, then they're not going to be a great architect. Wow. So he gets them sketching any, real rough outline of a shopping precinct, that's the word. And he gets them sketching that in 5 minutes, and then he goes, yeah, now put all the details on it.
That's fantastic.
And so, it's not just for the artists, it's for all sorts of careers. And I just find it absolutely fascinating what people can generate in their heads. Mm-hmm. And you can start very young, you can start with 4-year-olds and ask them what they can picture, and they'll probably think it's a bit weird to start with, but they'll get over it. And so that's what I will do with a class of kids. And we have unbelievably creative, curious 4-year-olds around us. And that's what I say about being led by the kids, is that I'm not saying writing in every class every day, but I'm saying get them doing what they're actually potentially good at doing today, and it doesn't have to be the same thing they're good at doing tomorrow, or they're interested in doing tomorrow.
But get them, put weight behind the things that they think they're good at now, because that builds a level of confidence. That's so important.
I was very impressed when I heard my daughter talking about imaginary people in my granddaughter's head, and most parents, if they got a child who's got imaginary friends, they'll go, somebody's going to turn around and say, that's ridiculous, don't do that. And I'm going, no, excuse me, that's absolutely brilliant. keep on with the pictures, because otherwise you'll tend to lose them over time. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah, if you don't use it, you lose it. Just an interesting anecdote when you're talking about imaginary things there. I remember, and my mum still to this day shudders. She was reading, I think, the Amityville Horror when I was very small. And I think, now I've never read it, but I think that there was a demonic, evil, imaginary friend called Jody. And she must have been talking to maybe my dad about it or somebody else about it. And little Alan overheard it. So for a few weeks, little Alan was walking around with this imaginary friend called Jody that we would have full conversations with. Absolutely terrified my mum because she thought that our little son was possessed by this demonic. So there you go. That was Alan's little picture. Olive, thanks so much for your contribution this evening. Jashon, have you any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Next time you see your child's teacher or you run into an educator that you know, just thank them. And I'll end it at that.
That's perfect. I think that's a really, really good way for us all to say thank you to all the educators, and for each of us, let's go out there and give them a big hug in an appropriate fashion. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Future-Proof Knowledge podcast, episode 16. Check out futureproofknowledge.com for some interesting tidbits. And yeah, like and share. It really does make a difference. Please subscribe to the channel on your podcast channel and check out our shorts and our social media. It makes a massive difference to us on the algorithms, which we're all a slave to anyway now. And we will be back next week with another episode of the Future-Proof Knowledge podcast.
Hey, Future-Proof Knowledge Podcast, mind unlocked. With every episode we cast real talk, real tools, wisdom on the fly. Tune in, geek out, reach for the sky.